Welcome to the Teach Better Talk podcast, your official podcast for the Teach Better Podcast Network, the hub for all things education, brought to you by teachbetter.com. The Teach Better Talk podcast is committed to answering your burning questions through a variety of lenses and bringing new offers to you and your colleagues to help you thrive throughout the school year. My name is Ray Hewart, and we love your questions here on the pod. If you have any questions that you'd love us to consider as topics for future episodes, please share them with us by emailing info@teachbetter.com. How does our definition of thriving cause more stress? Y'all know I'm so excited to talk about stressors and stress, and we have a pro with us here today. Before we get too far in, I do want to give a huge shout out to somebody who seems to handle stress like a baller, Miss Carrie Pitstick over on the Teach Better team. She has run our blog department for years, and she makes it look so easy. She is a full-time educator. She is a coach. She runs our blog department. She's a dog sitter. She does so many things, and she does it all with a smile. And Carrie, I don't know how you do it. It feels like you have more hours in the day than anybody in the world, including Beyonce. And we so love you like crazy. So huge shout out to Carrie. Somebody who also is going to help us hopefully seem more like Beyonce is Alison Smith. Alison is here to discuss thriving with us today and hopefully help us with our workload and our stressors so that we can thrive in any way, shape, and form, especially in our leadership roles. Alison, how are you doing today?
I'm so good. I'm so glad to be here, Ray, and just be able to share some of what I've learned along the way with some of your listeners.
Oh, I'm so glad that you were able to find time to do this with us. For our community who may not be connected to you, I'm so excited for them to get introduced to you here and then hopefully add you to their PLN. Do you mind sharing a little bit about what you do, who you are, kind of all that jazz?
Sure. I'm a leadership and resilience coach. I've been doing that for about 10 years. So I'm a full credentialed coach, professional coach with the International Coach Federation. And I started that business focused exclusively in the education sector. But let me back up, because my first job was actually as a classroom teacher in inner city Phoenix. I still live here in the Phoenix area, and that was such a powerful experience. I eventually left the classroom and was doing teacher professional development, going around the country, working with teachers, and saw how burnout and our own resilience played a part in our ability to effectively teach. And I was seeing the same thing happening with education leaders. And I thought, well, who is working on that? Who is helping us manage this difficult job, manage the stress? Because that's part of the job. And dealing with it effectively is absolutely mission critical to the work that we're trying to do with students, to their success, to having relationships with them, and all of that. And so at the time, there wasn't that many of us doing this kind of work. Now there's a few, but I'm just so grateful every time I get to meet a teacher. Sometimes they're in their early years of teaching, and sometimes they have been teaching for decades. And they really see the potential of working on themselves as a way to sustain in this profession, and then ultimately to serve their students better. So I say, do it for you, work on yourself, work on your stress, work on your resilience for you, because that's enough of a reason. But believe me, it will impact the students as well. And same goes for ed leaders, working on that for yourself ends up impacting the whole school community. So I'm super passionate about it. And ultimately, I always say, I don't want to just help people survive and overcome stress. I want to help them thrive. So that's my life's work. And I would love to, talk with any of the listeners further about it.
Well, and who honestly can say, no, I don't need a coach. No, I don't need a mentor. I don't need to improve in my life. That's our entire community is committed to being a little bit better each and every day, better today, better tomorrow. And I know that this is not only something that we've committed to in our educator life, in our professional life, but it's something I know I need to work on in my personal life as well. So I love that you were able to work with educators holistically, not only as an educator managing burnout and stress professionally, but I can only imagine that a lot of that leads into some of the management of their personal lives.
100%. It's all connected. I always say, like, I'm coaching you as a human being, not just you as a professional. And that's part of our challenge, is that because as educators, we are so committed. It is part of our purpose and really our identity, to be an educator and to serve students and to get better, a little bit better every day. And so, like, I love working with the go-getters and the givers of this field. And yet we do need someone there for us too, and really pouring into us too, so that we can pour into others. And so I do see such a connection between not only how we support ourselves personally, impacting our profession, but how we learn and practice certain ways of being at work that then can ultimately impact us in our personal lives.
Yeah. I always think of the mentorship that we may get early on in our career as educators that really focuses on, how does the copier work, or how do we lesson plan effectively? If you were to give any advice to educators that are in the space right now, we're kind of wrapping up October. October to me is always a really rough month. It's October and February. Those to me are the worst months.
Yep.
We're wrapping them up. What's some advice that maybe you are finding you might be giving to a bunch of your, mentees right now?
Yeah, I would say, really this is about tuning into yourself. Yeah. And connecting back to how things are going, because it's adaptive in this profession to look everywhere else to check in on our students. And I literally think the gaze goes outward, right? And sometimes that outward gaze obviously serves and supports the work that we do. And then every once in a while, we get caught up in that, and that becomes a habit. And we aren't actually spending any time gazing inward and just checking in. How am I doing? And there's actually a lot of research about this through the Greater Good Science Center. We know, and their Greater Good in Education department actually looks at how these practices affect educators. And one of the things we know is that when we tune in to ourselves, even just in a moment, and ask ourselves, like, ooh, how am I doing? It actually has tremendous impacts on us personally, on our ability to regulate our emotions, model that emotional regulation for students, on our ability to make decisions clearly and confidently, et cetera. And so those are the things we ultimately want. We want to be able to spend less time focusing on ourselves so that we can do the important work that we're doing and serve these amazing families and our school community in the most powerful way possible. And that happens through checking in with ourselves and knowing where we're at. Because if I'm totally stressed out and I am completely off the charts, tired, exhausted, et cetera, then I'm getting to the point of burnout. And ultimately, I might be, shorter in temper with students. I might not be thinking clearly or getting things done as efficiently. And that's typically what I hear in October and February. And to your point, that, Ray, you are not alone. That is exactly the pattern that I hear from educators and education leaders. So here we are, end of October. You may have almost vacated yourself for a little while. Come back, check in. How am I doing? What do I need? You're always asking, what do others need? But I just want you to take a minute. What do I need? Do I need a snack? Do I need a long talk with a friend? Do I need a good night's sleep? It doesn't always have to be self-care. Do I need some support on a curriculum subject that I need some help with? Do I need to have a tough conversation with a staff member that there's been some tension brewing? What do I need? And just asking ourselves that actually helps us. I always say, checking in on yourself does not make you self-centered. It makes you have a centered self.
I love that. Ugh, not self-centered, a centered self. That's powerful. Very, very powerful. A friend and coach recently had me make a list of cues that I can start to see as I look around that I might be entering into a phase of burnout. And silly things. I run out of coffee cups when I am entering into a phase of burnout. Laundry's piling up, or my desk has been messy for a few days, and I keep saying I'm going to get to it and I'm not. There are little cues that I'm entering into a spot that I am in overwhelm. I wonder if, as we got through October, if we need to do some of those resetting tactics and maybe write down some of those cues to help us be more successful as we enter into the year. Alison, I'm really excited to start talking about the difference between stress and stressors, the concept of how we can define, really looking at what thrive is. Let's get into this topic. Stick with us, friends. Let's get into that leading question. Quick pause to talk about the Teach Better Academy. Are you a member of the Teach Better Academy? For $9 a month, you can get access to over 40 courses that are specialized and designed for teacher leaders all across the US and Canada. These not only show you how to break down standards, bond with all of your students, design the best leadership plan, work with teachers with varying personality types, learn more about co-teaching, and anything in between. As you scroll through the Teach Better Academy, you'll see a number of courses that are all asynchronous for your learners and also give your teachers certified credit and badges for the work that they accomplish. Head over to teachbetter.com to learn more about the Academy, or just to look at the courses, both free and full workshops, and go explore. How does the definition of thrive actually lead to stress? We are here with Alison Smith, the guru of this concept. Alison, where do we begin with this idea?
Well, here's where I would suggest we begin, which is the definition of thriving. And you asked it so well. How does it get in the way? How does how we define thriving actually cause more stress and get in our way? And what I mean by that is that we all have these mental models around what it means to thrive. For me as a teacher, it was, that I had this Pinterest-worthy, Instagrammable classroom. As an ed leader, it was that everyone was on the same page and in the same boat, rowing in the same direction, right? And yet those very definitions of what we think it means to thrive can get in our way, because then when that's not happening, we go to those extremes of like, oh, I'm not being effective, or I'm bad at this, et cetera. And that then creates more stress. So I oftentimes will ask people to think about the visual that comes to mind when they hear the word thrive. What is the visual that comes to mind when you hear the word thrive? And oftentimes people will say things like standing on a mountaintop with your arms raised. Yep. Sometimes people will say success, achievement. We have one of the buses for the local universities here. They're using the word thrive in their marketing, and it's a person at graduation. It says learn to thrive, and it's a person at graduation with their arms out, and the word thrive is big. And these create a collective mental model around the word thrive, that it is about achievement, accomplishment, success, and having the energy and enthusiasm to spare in that moment. And the actual root word of thrive came from an Old Norse word that meant to grasp to oneself. To grasp to oneself. So this is all about being rooted and holding on to ourselves. And where I think we got this twisted is that it's really easy to hold on to ourselves in accomplishments, success, the achievements of life. I want to be centered in myself in that moment. But what happens when we get thrown off center? What happens when stressors come along, when failure happens? That's part of the human experience. We all experience that. And yet, can we thrive in that moment? Well, by the original definition, yes. And that's why I like to think of it as holding on to ourselves, staying rooted in our sturdy center. I would love and invite all of your listeners to redefine thriving that way. And so then we can just keep coming back to that center. We can do that in small ways. We can do that in big ways. But knowing, cultivating what that sturdy center feels like, and then returning to that sturdy center time and time again is really the key to thriving.
So as we are creating that sturdy center, I assume that the first element to that must be, or at least a part of that must be, really understanding who we are and who we want to be, and then continuing to pull those pull those choices that we make throughout the day back to that core. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's an example. So one of the ways that you can cultivate and get to know your sturdy center is to do a little values clarification exercise. And you can find these. You can also email me for a values exercise that I do with my clients. But when you can clarify your values, it can be truly like a North Star, so that during the day you can check in with that. And you can do it very simply. But I was doing this work with some educators this summer, and one of them said, I realized that one of the things that is a value for me is cultivating community. And she said, I think that's why I love being part of committees at school. And she said, but is there a thing, like, is there too much of your values that gets in the way? Because sometimes I feel like that, oversteps, and too many committees and signing up for too many things end up taking me away from that center point of why I wanted to be there in the first place. And I asked her, similar to your coach, like, what would tell you when you have crossed the line? Can you find that line so that you can do the things that do feel core and of core importance to you, without overdoing it to the point where now you've lost yourself because you're just too stressed and stretched thin?
Yeah, I think that's got to be a part of this process, is doing that constant check-in and reflection, so you can find those boundaries. I think as educators, we struggle so much. We struggle so much with that, especially if we love volunteering. And then those educators that never volunteer, those are usually educators that found themselves over volunteering, and then we overcompensate. And so we never volunteer again.
Right. Right. Could we find that middle ground where this is the right committee to be on because it's the right, let's say it's community, right? That's bringing you there. This is the right community I want to build, or this is the thing that feels most purposeful for me. And so I'm going to say yes to those things and say no to the things that take me away from center, the things that are too much, that I don't feel a purpose in, right? So that we're really saying yes to the things that bring us back to that place, so that we can be in our sturdiness all the time, and not saying yes to the things that don't. And of course, some of those things are out of our control. There are just things that we have to do that take us off center. And to your point about stress, right? That's really those moments where we're off center are stressors. That is stress in our body. And so I do actually want to make a distinction between stressors and stress, because I think it is helpful here. Stressors are things that take us off center. They're the things that cause a stress response in our body. Stress is the stress response in our body: fight, flight, freeze. So you know what that feels like when you feel stress in your body. Maybe you have tension in your neck, or you have certain things that you notice about yourself when your body is in stress mode. So we got to distinguish that from the stressors, because they require different supports, right? I'm not going to, I need to take care of the stress in my body, maybe through movement, maybe through some breaths. And then I also need to handle the stressor, and I need to decide what to do about that stressor. But then there's like this third element that doesn't get talked about very often, that I like to throw in here when we're talking about stress, which is our story. We have a story in our mind about the stressor, whatever the stressor is, that absolutely impacts the stress that we feel in our body, and ultimately can take us off of the right track in solving the problem for ourselves. So I'm on this committee, and I might be telling myself a story about how this committee or this person on the committee is the source of my stress. Maybe it's because they're not fully committed, right? I'm doing air quotes, or whatever. We have a story in our mind. And oftentimes that story is informed by like how we were raised and our previous trauma and our previous things. So those are not
one conversation with them 2 years ago, out of context.
right. Exactly. They're not always true. In fact, they're almost always not true. So if we can get really clear about, and curious about those stories, like, whoa, I just kind of jumped to conclusions about this person in this committee, then it helps us decide what is actually the stressor here. What do I want to tell myself about it? What story, in other words, what story will serve my action that I want to take, my response that I want to take to this? And then how do I want to deal with the stress in my body? And I actually think, it kind of follows this pattern. We got to deal with the stress in our body before we deal with the story that we're telling ourselves, and then ultimately deal with the stressor. Because when we take care of the stress in our bodies and then we rewrite the stories in our mind about it, that's going to give us the most clarity to deal with the stressor in the best way possible.
I think there's so much to reflect on here. I love that we're going to be able to take this, be able to apply it right off the bat and enter into November, hopefully with a different approach to handle our stress in a different way. Stick with us, friends. We're going to be getting into some major takeaways and, of course, how you can connect with Alison.
This episode is brought to you by S'more. Struggling to create a beautiful school newsletter people will actually read? Take a look at S'more. S'more is a newsletter creator built for educators like you, and you can get 50% off your first year of your paid S'more account now that you are connected to Teach Better. With hundreds of customizable templates, you can add your own text, images, videos, links, polls, or anything else you can think of for the perfect newsletter for your school community. Oh yeah, and it also can auto-translate your newsletter into like 100 different languages. So definitely something you want to look at, especially when it gives you detailed analytics for everything, including open rates and what links your community is clicking on. So simple, so easy, so effective. Get started today over at s'more.com/teachbetter.
As we wrap up our conversation here with stress and how we can understand ourselves better to shift it into looking at how we can thrive, we are going to look at a major takeaway and then how you can connect one-on-one personally with Alison Smith. When we think of our listeners here taking away one key idea from our conversation here, Alison, what's one thing they should walk away with, maybe food for thought from this episode?
Well, I hope that your major takeaway is redefining thrive so that you can, truly come back to yourself in these moments and cultivate your internal sturdiness. But I will say, as a teacher and as a leader, I did not know where that internal center was. You spend so much time focusing on everyone else that, there were times when I didn't even know what I like to do for fun anymore. I didn't know what I could do to relax myself. I had literally lost myself. And so if that's you, I just want to encourage you that that's okay. Like, that is a place to start too. How can I get to know myself? And that's where I just really encourage your listeners, if they don't already work with a professional coach, to contact someone. And if you don't have anyone, contact me, because there is such value in having someone hold space where they're not giving you advice. They're not telling you what to do. They are literally just there to help you connect back to your wisdom, your center, your sturdiness inside, and help you cultivate that so that you can use that internal resource to guide you forward. So that would be my takeaway, and I know it's a big one, but to just connect back to that place. And if you can't find it, get help with it. Get some support.
So good. Alison, how can they stay connected to you and the work you're doing?
Sure. You can visit me on my website, thethrivedesigner.com. You can also see me on LinkedIn and Instagram, where I post content about finding your sturdy center, staying in your sturdy center, and ultimately designing your life to thrive.
Definitely go follow all those platforms. And of course, if you have any issues connecting with Alison or any guest that is on the Teach Better pod, you can reach out to me or anyone on the Teach Better team, and we'll make sure to get you connected. Alison, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.